All I remembered from the crash was the sound of screaming metal. It was a wet December Tuesday, and I was driving to do my weekly grocery shop. David had been begging me to get the bus since my glaucoma had gotten worse, but I refused to listen. I was a perfectly healthy woman at age 72, and I've been driving since my father taught me on the farm at 13. David is going to think this was all my fault, but I'll just make him look at the police report. The other driver sped a red light and slammed into me side on. Died instantly, apparently. My car spun out onto the curb and wrapped itself around a street lamp. The whole ordeal lasted less than 5 seconds. I woke up at St. Anne Hospital a day later after what the doctor told me was a light coma. Cuts and bruises covered my body, especially around my eyes where the airbags had deployed. 2 dark circles and a broken nose made me look like an old peach you'd find at the back of the fridge. Every bone in me felt out of place, and I could barely move. After a brisk chat with me, the doctor met a woman at the door. They shook hands before she hobbled over. She was tall and thin with an air of faded glamour, tightly wound hair, large gold rings, her crooked body wrapped in a woolen shawl. She had a stern but concerned smile. "How are you, Mary?" she asked, her voice sounding broken with a deep rasp. "Who are you?" I asked. "It's me," she said. "It's..." Each guttural word cut through me. "Your sister," she said. I had never met this woman in my life. "You must be confused," I said. She tilted her head to her shoulder and rubbed the back of her fingers through my hair. "Oh dear, I think you're the one who is a tad confused. You've been in a nasty accident," she said, the pleasantry of her words undercut by the chainsaw of her voice. It was then I noticed the cracks in her glamour. Her eyes were round and bulbous in a state of constant alarm. Her jaw hung lax, revealing the bottom of yellowing teeth. The white powder she used on her face did little to smooth out the wrinkles on her skin. As she leant over to kiss my forehead, a dank, boggy stench seeped into my broken nose. "I'm so glad you're okay," she whispered. I raised my arm, sending shooting pains up to my shoulder, and pushed her away. It was an exhausting endeavor, and once the woman stepped back, my arm flopped down to the bed as I gasped for air. "I don't have a sister," I said, straining to get the words out. "The guy you hit died, you know," she said, lifting the shawl back over her shoulder, the beads around her wrist clacking together as she did so. "I want to talk to my son," I said. "David would be able to sort this mess out. He was logical, like his father, may he rest in peace. David lived in Europe doing something with the internet. I didn't understand any of it, but it gave my 2 granddaughters a life I could have only dreamed of. We didn't see eye to eye too often. I was too emotional, too reckless for David's taste, again, much like his father, but I needed his sensibilities now. David's arriving tomorrow, flying back from Zurich just for you," said the crooked woman. "I don't want you here," I barked. "I don't know you." The crooked woman pursed her lips and wandered over to the side table. She grabbed a plastic cup and filled it with water. "You're acting like the princess of Apple Tree Castle," she asked. How did she know about Apple Tree Castle? That was the nickname I gave to the treehouse my father constructed for my 8th birthday. It was my safe space, away from the arguments, the graft, and the drama of a working farm. He'd even painted the inside of it in an off pink, and allowed me to decorate it with the old pillows and blankets from the living room. I'd spent many summer evenings listening to the gentle rustling of the trees. That was until one of my school friends, a girl I can no longer remember, fell from it and seriously hurt herself. The girl's parents were furious and demanded that the treehouse be taken down. I had to watch as my dad dismantled my childhood with each chop of his axe. Now, the woman in my hospital room was telling me that the little girl who left a bloody stain in the mud wasn't some faded memory of a friend. It was my sister. It was her. She pointed to her slack jaw, wobbling her chin with her finger. "Broke it in 3 places," she said. I held my eyes shut. I felt disoriented, and my stomach was doing circuits, as if it was still spinning in the crash. I've never had a sister. I have decades of memories to prove it. But how could she have known about my secret haven, something I haven't spoken about since I was a child? "I need to eat," I said, opening my eyes. The woman was standing over me, a small teaspoon in hand, and a confused look on her face. In her other hand was an empty yogurt pot. "You've just eaten." "Dear," she said. I looked down at the tray in front of me. An empty crisp packet and a few crumbs of bread was all that was left. The sour taste of old yogurt stuck to my tongue. "You're so forgetful, just like Mama," she said, carefully placing the spoon and yogurt on the tray. She picked it up and moved it to the table where several other trays were scattered. "How long have I been here for?" I asked. She placed her hands on her hips. "How many times do I have to tell you? A couple of days, she said. My head throbbed and my jaw ached. And David will be here tomorrow. The crooked woman sat down on the sofa, just far away enough so my eyes couldn't focus on her. She faded in and out of the shadow. It'll be so lovely to see him again. Did the man in the other car? I said, trailing off. Yes, instantly, apparently, said the woman. No pain, just immediate nothingness. Must be nice, in a way. The throbbing in my head turned into a searing pain behind my eyes. Darkness crept across my vision, making it feel as if I was staring down an endless tunnel. Everything hurt. I wanted to be free of this pain, of this awful place. I yearned for nothingness, but I was trapped here with this woman, my sister. I thought I had been alone for so long, my entire life, but she had supposedly been with me every step of the way. She should understand me better than anyone else. What was Dad's nickname for me? I asked. Minnie, like the mouse, said the darkness. Was that right? I didn't remember anymore. I'm so tired, I said. Then sleep. Tell me about Mum. And Dad, I said, shutting my eyes. She began, but it was like she was describing my parents from an old photograph. Her words were blurry and unfocused, with small details that felt off. She said that our father had a crook in his nose, but I had never noticed it, and our mother's parting in her hair was on the left, not the right, as I remembered. Was that right? Had I just not paid them all that much attention? Too busy wrapped up in my own drama and emotions. She moved on to stories of our winter getaways, driving up to Scotland in the run-down VW camper van. Although it wasn't a VW, it was a Ford. I remember the little blue logo on the bumper. We went to our favorite campsite, Edinburgh, but I've never been to Edinburgh. Dad used to say it was too expensive, so we'd drive further to Glasgow. Our dog Remy loved to sit with us in the back seat. These stories were almost true, so close that I wished they had been, that I had a sister, that this whole mess made sense. All I remember from the crash is the sound of screaming metal. I woke up in complete nothingness. Is this what the other driver felt as his face passed through the steering wheel? But the dull green light of the fire alarm brought me back to my hospital room. Dark shapes began to appear as my eyes slowly got used to the dark. The stories had stopped, but they'd been replaced by something more sinister. Slow, gurgling breaths came from the darkness, like the sputtering engine of an idle camper van. In the corner of the room, by the sofa, I could make out a blurry figure in the shadows. It stood motionless, head turned towards me. You're not my sister, are you? I murmured. The smell of sitting water and mud crept from the darkness, but the figure remained still. I am now. I kicked off my duvet, slapped my aching hand against the cables jabbed in my arm, and yanked them out. I had to leave, escape the darkness. The machine let out a digital scream. Its screen lit up, casting stark shadows across the floor in front of me, and barely illuminating the door at the other end of the room. The shadows undulated around me. Was it from the scream or the crooked woman creeping closer towards me? I dropped my naked feet down on the cold tiles, barely steadying myself. My vision blurred, and the stabbing pain behind my eyes returned. I thought I was about to throw up, but instead, I took my first step forward, then a second. Slowly but surely, I headed towards the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Don't, came a gargling whisper. A dark blur moved around the corner of my eyes. A hand outstretched. I felt a moist touch brush against my left shoulder. Pops and crackles erupted in my chest as my breaths became strained. They were turning thick and humid. My voice rasped as I struggled towards the door. It was like I was drowning in my own bile. I fell to my hands and knees. My body was failing me. I spat on the floor and tried to continue on, but I collapsed in a few seconds. I felt the wet moisture crawl across my body as something whispered in my ear. It's okay, you're here now. I jolted awake back in my hospital bed. The light was blinding, and the shooting pains in my brain returned. My ears rang out with a high-pitched tone. I squeezed my eyes shut and focused on my gasping breaths. I touched my face and felt the warm plastic of an oxygen mask. I was safe. After a few seconds, my breathing slowed, but the pain and screams in my ears remained. I opened my eyes to see David sitting on a chair by the door, furiously talking on the phone. He hadn't noticed me waking up. I looked around the room. It was just him. I felt a warm glow rush over me, a sheer sense of joy that I hadn't felt in a long time. David glanced over at me and realized I was awake. He smiled. Then the door opened. A crooked arm snuck in, and the rest of her body followed with it. The woman who thought she was my sister peered her head around with a warm smile. I held my mask tight as my lungs tightened. I pointed a finger at the woman, screaming for breath. My ears howled. David got up and stormed over to the woman. He shook his head. It looked like he was yelling. She was yelling back. Did he have no clue who she was, either? My sister was just an insane woman. She was disturbed, to be sure, but at least it made sense. But then he crumpled into her embrace. His shoulders shuddered as he let out bellowing cries. She rubbed his back gently, eyes firmly fixed on me, a gentle smile on her face. I ripped off the oxygen mask, trying with all my might to scream, but only rasping gargles came out. David ran over, drying his face with his shirt. He looked at me with genuine concern, a deep pain, as he held onto my shoulders firmly. "It's okay, you're here now," he said. I looked up at his big brown eyes. It was then I remembered my son's eyes were green.